Welcome to Becoming Parents Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Campbell. I'm a doula in Washoe County, Nevada, a Medicaid provider, a lactation educator, childbirth educator, and mom of 18. You can find me and connect on doulainreno.com. Remember, give a shout out to those who are brave enough to share their stories with us on how they have become parents. Let's dive in. Welcome to Becoming Parents Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Campbell, and today I'm here with Anna Maria DiDio. I did that right.
Yes.
How are you doing today?
I'm well. Thank you so much.
I'm really excited about your parenting journey. So jump in and start sharing that with us.
Well, it's funny. At one point I was in a storytelling competition, and I was telling this story, and I started with, it took me 2 husbands and 10 years to have a child. Um, uh, so when I was married for the first time, it was clear that I had infertility issues. And well, I didn't know that till we started to try, that lovely word, trying, to have a baby. And after my miscarriage and the result treatments and such, it was clear that I needed further intervention. But unfortunately, the marriage didn't withstand that. So, we ended up getting divorced. But when I was remarried, of course, the infertility issues continued. So it didn't magically disappear. So I knew that we had to, consult an expert, and that involved, um, of course, surgery and pharmaceuticals and all kinds of things. And it appeared nothing was working. So we ventured down the adoption path and stopped the treatments. But then, as soon as we stopped the treatments, I was pregnant. So we had a beautiful baby girl. But then, excuse me, but then after that, adding to our family was impossible. So we had, consulted further fertility specialists. And that's when I went down the adoption path again, and had some twists and turns, and agency ended up closing. And so I just happened to see an article about a agency that was sponsoring children, because this time our daughter was getting older, and I think the time for an infant had passed us by. So I saw an article about children from Mexico coming to the US for summer camp, and the end of the article, it said, these children are eligible for adoption. So that's how we one biological child and one adopted child. So
I love
that's the
that. I had
story.
the same experience with infertility. I got all the way through all the surgeries and all the medication and feeling like a psychopath and just emotionally and physically drained. And they told me IVF, and I was like, nope. And as they were weaning me off, I got pregnant. So I know a lot of people either do that or they start the adoption process and then get pregnant. It's like you need to trick your body into getting pregnant sometimes. Did you go through a lot of those surgeries with your first marriage, or was just the idea of
No,
not being okay?
everything happened in the second marriage, and that was part of the issue. The support was, really need to just have you're one step away from being psycho, so you have to have that support
Yes.
of partners and family, and everything was kind of falling apart. And so it was really the second marriage. We set off on that path together, and that was why it was successful.
I agree. I mean, infertility, I was divorced too, and I don't know that that was the only reason, but definitely I think there should be some sort of therapy and counseling surrounding women going through infertility for both people, because it really is so traumatic, in ways you don't realize or expect, and just creates a lot of stress on a relationship.
Right.
So same thing with me. I mean, I went through, I knew I was going to pick up where I left off, you know? And so having that information beforehand and going into being married with that, that was a lot less stressful. So I completely agree. What was the pregnancy like?
It was uneventful, which was good. I had a job where I was traveling, and the only issue was I was traveling, and I got a cold and was just tired. And but again, miraculously, it really was not an issue. So I thought it would happen again, but no, no dice.
Yeah, and you had no desire to go through infertility again after.
No, no,
No. Did you end up going and doing IVF?
no. We never got that far.
Yeah, okay. So very similar, and that's really exciting. Now with adoption, I've also done 6 adoptions. So you and I have these parallel lives. And I went through CPS, social services. Tell me about the different, because we usually you look into a whole myriad of different ways to adopt. And tell me about the different things you looked into and why you did or didn't decide to go that way. I know some of them you can't adopt a newborn because the child you have is too old. Other than that, what was their cutoff on that?
Well, the first time we went through the adoption process, we signed on with an open adoption agency. So, we put together a book about us and a video, and we did all the interviews, and that's when I got pregnant. So we we had to take our name off the list. So
Okay.
then of course we were raising our daughter, and then after that I had 2 more miscarriages, and was really thinking, well, do I want to do the whole adoption thing again? So we signed up for another open adoption agency, and after a year they called us and said, oh, we said, oh, is it time to renew our paperwork? And they said, no, we're closing. So I felt like we wasted a lot of time. And look, we also looked into and went to training for foster to adopt, and looked into other open agencies. And then, as I said, I just happened to see this article, and time was ticking. So our daughter was 5, 6. So
Okay.
when we adopted our daughter from Mexico when she was 6, almost 7, and our daughter was 7, 8, almost 9.
Oh, that was a nice spread. So it's just interesting to know that the varying different, I guess, parameters or that allow you or don't allow you to adopt, including age. And yeah, you did you wasted a lot of time, but and that's unfortunate. What was your decision to go with an open adoption?
Well, when we looked at all the possibilities, even though it was scary, scary, scary as heck for me to have someone else involved in my whole family process and decisions, I thought it was the best. And this was, many years ago, of course. I still thought it was the best for to have no secrets. I'll call it, just to have everything out in the open. And that obviously did not work out. And then the foster to adopt situation, we we ultimately decided not to go down that road, just because we obviously already had a child, and that was one of the reasons that the international adoption, frankly, was somewhat attractive. That we knew that would be a situation that we could sort of control, and then at
Yeah.
the end, that would be the end of the process. So it worked.
I agree. And I did everything through CPS, but I looked into lots of other ways to do things. And expense was a barrier. We looked into China, so probably similar to
Similar.
Mexico. We looked into other countries. We looked into orphanages. We looked into just all kinds of stuff. But cost was a really big barrier, and time, the amount of time it can take in another
Yeah.
country, I thought was a barrier. The foster adopt, I mean, the barrier I think is just that is a tough system to work in, and I think all of them are. Um, and ours, I elected open so that the biological parents could have as much contact with me. I've had the same email address. I've kept it for 27 years, even though I don't use
Oh,
it
man.
anymore, just in case. They could contact me on social media. They could have as much contact with me as they wanted, but it was up to the child when they became teenagers and wanted to reach out and have contact. So what did that process look like for you?
What in terms of how it
How
worked out?
open it was or how much contact you ended up having?
Well, with the international situation, she was in a shelter slash orphanage for 6 years of her life. So we actually met the director of the orphanage prior to she was working with the agency that we had here in Pennsylvania. She had been working with them, so we met her, and then we went to Mexico for a meet and introductory meeting kind of thing. And so, as it turns out, because adoption begins with trauma. And that's really where I started and why I started to write the books that I'm writing. And it seemed to me to make sense. And this was many years ago, and it took me quite a long time to figure it out. It seemed that the more contact she had with her heritage and her culture, it would make the transition that much easier. So we did stay in touch with the women from the orphanage, and honestly, we're still in touch to this day.
Oh,
So you say the word orphanage, and perhaps you have things that come to mind, but this was a very loving and beautiful environment. It was kind of a house that had a pool, and the kids just all played together. And the women that cared for them were called Tias, and our daughter had a very special relationship with her Tia, and just missed her very much.
I actually prefer the orphanage model over our foster care model. I think that there are pros and cons in all of them, and they can all be terrible and they can all be great. But yeah, I actually prefer that model. I think yeah, but everybody has different interpretations of what that means. That's so fascinating. So she was 6, and you said things come from trauma, and I want to get into your books a lot. Adoption books for me made a huge difference when my kids were little. I found like a baby book where you do the monthly and the information that was specifically for adoption. So where my biological kids had one type, my adopted kids had the other type. And they were all the same for biological and all the same for adoption. That made a big difference because it kind of, you don't sort of know the information to put in or how to ask the questions differently in adoption when you're starting out. And then just books, kids' books about adoption. We wanted the kids to know from the very beginning. Your daughter was a little older. With older kids, obviously they know. And I did a couple of our adoptions older, but 3 were newborns, and you have to make a decision on how you're going to have conversations. So how did you address her trauma, the language barrier, if there was one, her missing people that were there in the life that she had had for 6 years? How did you work through that coming home?
Well, and again, that's part of the reason I decided to write the books, because I didn't deal with this um, in a way that was in a timely way, let's just say. So when people would say to us, and people often refer to this as the myth of adoption, and perhaps people said this to you, oh, your kids, she's so lucky. She's so lucky to be adopted by you and your wonderful family, et cetera, et cetera. And I bought into that for so long. And but yet her behavior was telling me something else. I mean, she was sad. She had tantrums. It was hard to get her into the family mix. And so that's when I began to really look into and understand the trauma associated with adoption and appreciate all that she had lost. In one way, it sounds obvious. One day she went to bed in Mexico and had all of the surrounded by this loving community. And the next day she was in suburban Philadelphia in a house with a sister, and she didn't speak a word of English. So it was traumatizing for her 2 times over. And I just when her behavior and the evidence of this trauma was just in our lives, I began to research it and understand it more, and really it looked to address it. So and hence I thought, how can I help other parents see this a little bit earlier and encourage that conversation? And that's the reason for this children's books.
You're so right. They do say that, like this kid's the lucky one. And I always felt like I was grateful and blessed to have been given the opportunity to be this child's mom that I didn't give birth to. And also, that doesn't mean that I'm some great parent that's always doing this exceptional job.
Right.
Or, I mean, it's interesting. And I think, when as our kids were growing up, one of my adopted daughters, who's just hilarious, she just has the most hilarious personality. And she'd say, Mom didn't know what she was getting with you. She picked me, to the biological daughter. And you were a genetic crapshoot, but she chose me special. I think you can have a really good, fun atmosphere about it, and it still doesn't diminish the trauma. What was the best for you? First, how did you get over the language barrier? That would be, I think, the one of
Yeah.
the most
Yeah.
challenging things.
And there was even anger. She at one point we did have some translators, and she said, why did you adopt me if you can't even speak Spanish? And we had been assured by the agency, of course, and it was totally minimized by the agency. Oh, kids are so resilient. She'll learn English in no time. And she did. She learned English very quickly. But the loss of her language was another thing that she
Wow.
suffered. And and I could see it. So, she didn't verbalize that. But then in middle school, so she was 7 in second grade, and then like fifth grade, I think fifth, sixth grade, when they started integrating, language into the her studies, it came back to her in just an amazing way. I mean, she heard the lessons, and she was for years she was hesitant to speak out loud, but the little bit she said, her accent was beautiful. And as the years progressed, when she had a phone, she changed the entire phone to Spanish. She reconnected with children from the shelter where she grew up and the caregivers, and listened to Spanish music and started reading. And so it came back to her, and reclaiming that was such a powerful thing for her. And I'm saying this, for her self-esteem and her identity, and that's what I observed. She works now in the Hispanic community. I mean, she really is. She's an amazing woman now, of course.
I love that you said that, it was one more loss, because we wouldn't think of it necessarily. We'd think about this great opportunity they have to learn English and be with a family and have an American upbringing, a US upbringing, never thinking about the fact that in her mind it's just another loss, which how wonderful that she got to reclaim that. What other things helped you recognize what her traumas were, have those conversations with her and work through that? Because then you turned around and started writing books to help other people. So I want to segue into that for sure. But I know other than her language, there were temper tantrums, there were, why did you adopt me? There was the anger, there was all of that. And what was it like to work through that? What was it like to realize like you weren't the blessing? Because that's a hard one.
Yes. Yeah, it was. Well, one of the a piece of advice that I always give, and maybe there's in some families' minds, there's stigma attached to reaching out to therapists, having your kid in therapy, but we relied on therapists at different points in her. We connected with a therapist that was specialized in play therapy, and it helped us talk a little bit about something silly as a family and get the conversation flowing. And then, of course, as she middle school or teenage years, the problems were different, and we switched to another therapist. And just I just try and keep, as my knowledge of the trauma increased, I think our language about it
Mm, mm.
Was better, and I was more understanding. And sometimes if I could think it through, that it wasn't, the anger was just, or the tantrums, or the disassociation. Sometimes she wouldn't join in with a family, or these are things that she just needed to work out in time. And I look back and I think, oh, you were too impatient with all that. And but I tried to give her space, and for the most part, it worked. But as she grew, and now, of course, out of the house and whatnot, I started with my memoir. Love at the Border is my memoir of our
Okay.
experience, and I kept a journal. And when I retired from corporate life, I began to write that. But I thought, well, how can I really help parents just jumpstart the conversation I wish I had, and and not be so threatened? Children are adopted children are going to think, who do I look like? Where did I come from? Is that my mom in the supermarket? And so
Mm.
it really is. I wanted to give kids permission to think that and say that, and I thought the best way to do that was really through the books.
I love the books. Like I said, it made a really big difference to me, a significant difference when I was um, going through the adoption process myself, because you don't know how to even put things into words sometimes in a different way, or from that perspective, because I'm not in that perspective. So it started out with your memoir, and then take us through each of the books, because you have more than one.
Yes, well, there are three in a series. I call them Life Adventures series, and they are, well, everything's inspired, but the three books for children, I'll say age 4 to 8, where all the events in the books are took place in our own family. So the first is Many People to Love, which is really the story of Carla from Colombia. Because if I wrote any more about my own kids, they would kill me. So I said, I'm not going to write. I said, Mom, stop writing about us. So Many People to Love is the story of Carla being adopted from Colombia, and the transition from a shelter, an orphanage, to a house, and getting used to living with a family. One funny thing, when she first came to live with us, again through a translator, my daughter told the translator that she was bored. I thought I was just all put out. Bored? Are you bored? Because, and then, but think about it. She was with 30 other kids that
Yeah.
had a pool and all this fun, and the kids were probably always playing games and tricks on people. And then now she was in this house with one other child, and it was probably just the worst experience. And she just let us know, man, that was the worst time of her life. But it was, it should have been time when I was thinking a little bit more about those losses. But I kept wondering, well, when is she going to get with the program and really love this house, love my fluffy towels, and all the things she didn't have. And it just was such the wrong, focus. So that's, again, that's where the energy for the books came from. Then the second book is How I Wonder Where You Are. And again, this is Carla's wondering and thinking, even though she knows she's in a different country, she looks at women shopping, and she's jealous of her sister because her sister does look like her mother.
Mm.
And there are triggers like putting together a family tree was one family event that we had that was difficult. And how to how to feel at home in a family in a country where you were not, it's not native to you. So that book again is permission for parents and kids to raise topics that possibly are threatening, and be comfortable with that. Then the third book is Carla the Conqueror. And reading was, of course, a huge hurdle for my daughter. And luckily, she had a very wonderful connection with the ESL teacher. I'm not sure what they call it now, but it used to be called English as a Second Language. And when she was asked to read out loud, my daughter did not have a good reaction in the classroom, and this is a little bit of that struggle told from Carla's point of view, and how she eventually had the courage to read out loud. Well, then I transitioned to middle grade. Now I'm writing a series about middle grade kids ages 8 to 12, and this will be more of a blended family experience. Grace is the main character, and she is a smart kid who loves reading and writing. And she meets a friend, Andy, and he's adopted, and he asks her to help him with a secret mission to find his birth mother. So that's
Wow. Okay. All right. I didn't expect that, obviously. How much, I know you're taking your experience and making it fiction so your kids won't have a meltdown. I get that.
yeah.
But a lot of it is really your experiences and how you navigated through. How much, one thing I did not ask was, what was this whole process like for your biological daughter?
It was huge. Thanks for asking that. It's a very good question because for 8 years she was an only child and had all the attention and all the gifts and all the whatever. And at a few points, she had meltdowns. She's getting all the attention. She just didn't want to share.
Right.
And we had we were a new family at that point, and I'd love to hear how you have a lot larger. We had kind of two things to balance, but it was really, if I had to do it over again, I would spend more time individually with
Mm.
each one, and then of course there was that competition and competitiveness that just I'm you know what it goes on to this day. I'm telling you, it's some days it's really still tough between the two of them.
I get that. I think, I started doing foster care when my oldest daughter was 4, and then I had my second one, and we didn't actually, then I had my third one. So they were 6, 2, and just born. And a year later, they were 7, 3, and 1. And we got our first placement. So it took like 3 years to get our first placement because
Wow.
we were in the foster adoption program, and it was an infant. It was the day he was born. But I think in foster care, we talked a lot about, I had family councils with my kids. And so we were making decisions as a family, even though I was pretty sure I knew the decision that was going to be made, and the kids didn't necessarily dictate it, but we wanted them to be really prepared. So we would have family council meetings about every time we got a phone call, every time there was a situation. And I said no more than I said yes, which is crazy because I have 18 kids, but you know, um, and 10 of them came from either foster care or foreign exchange or some program. But I think that also when you do foster care, you're kind of constantly doing it. There were some kids that came in and out that weren't part of the foster adoption program. There were the transition periods. There were sibling groups on a couple occasions. And so actually my kids were more upset when I stopped. When I was
Oh,
like,
really?
I'm done with foster care, we're done. And they were not happy about it.
Wow.
But I was a single mom. I kept doing it as a single mom after my divorce. And then I blended families a couple years later. So I think it's just a different perspective, but definitely one thing that I'm glad I did were the mommy daughter dates. So that's kind of what you're saying, really individual. And it's hard with a big family when I was working full time, when I was single, but really
How did you have
trying.
the time for all that? Oh my gosh, you
I don't
must
know.
be
I mean, I
super
got up
loaded.
you get up at 5 to work out because your kids are still asleep. And then dinner was a really big tradition. That was a super important part of our day. And then just even if it's just deliberately spending time, it's not the amount or the money, the amount of time or the amount of money. It's really singling them out in a special way. And so that doesn't necessarily take large amounts of time or any money. So it could have been a walk, or you get to pick the running route we go on while you ride bikes. It's just making each one of them feel special.
Yeah.
And that's really important because the biological kids can get lost in the shuffle of, kids that come from an orphanage, kids in an adoptive situation. Um, they need more automatically, and that can be really hard to manage. So Yeah, I think your suggestions were great. How much did your kids help you with the books, or did they edit or proof, or what was that interaction like?
Well, that answer is pretty short. They wanted nothing to do with them.
Okay, I'm okay. You never know. And then what about how do they like them now that they're done and they've read them?
Well, the children's books, yes. So that's nice. I mean, it's pretty much a not. There's not much shared. That none of them have read the memoir.
Okay.
Um, but the children's books, they like because obviously the experiences are so kind of hit close to home, but
Yeah.
they're supportive, but they're not. I honestly, I think they're still a little bit embarrassed, even though they're older.
They're both adults now. So I know that your adoption was at 6, and how old was your daughter then?
7, 6. They're
Okay.
only a year
Oh,
apart, 6 and 7. And then when she came to live with us, finally, they were 7 and 8,
okay. And how old are they now?
29 and 30.
Okay, so this is great. It's over 20 years. What are they both? Can you share what they're doing for jobs at all? Because you mentioned that your adopted daughter is working with the Hispanic community.
In training and development, um, it's for women who have been sexually abused,
Oh, okay.
and she has had a lot of training and is really good with women and families, and works in the community. And the other daughter is in school, and she's getting an advanced degree in engineering and an MBA.
Nothing at all. Like,
Yeah, like they're totally, yeah, they're total opposite strengths and interests and
that's
everything.
great.
Yeah.
What is on the agenda for more books? Because you said that the last one, the Grace About Grace, is a series. So what's on the horizon for books?
Well, again, my mission is really about blended families. So Grace's next adventure or situation will be as it relates to families who are in the midst of separation and divorce.
Mm.
So just how what happens when stepchildren, join the mix, or, so her friends, the friend that was adopted is still seeking a little bit of closure with his birth mother. That's part of the plot. But the series will be focused on, and I may interview you now that we're talking
Oh yeah.
divorce, and then I hope to write a book about foster care. I have no direct experience with that. I have two nieces that were in foster care, but that were adopted by my brother. So it's a little bit in the family, but I have no direct experience with foster care. So I might tap your experience for some ideas.
Excellent. I love that. Anna Maria, thank you so much for being on and sharing your journey. What a ride.
So much. All my books are available Amazon, and or my website is amddio.com, and all the information about the books are there. amdidio.com.
And we have everything in the show notes so people can click and just go straight there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.